let's begin. Hi everybody, welcome. My name is Carrie Mahoney and I'm with the ARC of Massachusetts, and we were very privileged to receive a grant from the Dana Home Foundation of Lexington to be able to offer this series. And so the Dana Home Foundation, really its purpose is to help support older caregivers living in Lexington. So we developed Rosalie Eads, who's usually here. She's around chasing her granddaughter at this moment. She put together a 6-week educational series, which hopefully, which many of you have been attending. This is our 5th in the series, and next week will be our last one. Then come the spring, we're very excited to be offering a 3-session workshop on writing your letter of intent. So, in terms of estate planning and, the next steps for your loved one and your kids and that sort of thing, it's just the best document in the world. Because to me, it's all about talking about the quality of life for your loved one. I'm just going to tell you a really quick story. It was I think 3 years ago now. It was around Christmas. There was a family, an attorney I used to work with long time ago called me and he said, "Can you help this family?" So a friend of his called, and the mother passed away unexpectedly 3 days after Christmas. Well, in their family was the mother, she had a son, an adult son who has Down syndrome, and she also has a daughter who lived with her, but she also had a son who was married and with a family but lived in the community. So basically, no one expected this mom to pass on. So they called in a panic. They had this son especially had no idea what was up. Who do you talk to? What phone number? Who's the service coordinator? What does he do during the day? What kind of services does he get? None of this was passed along to them. So through a lot of questions and investigation, we were able to piece it all together. Turns out this son, her son was very well served. He had a day program. They received adult family care funding. He also got some DDS funding, and he had a service coordinator and all of the above. Well, that's one part of the letter of intent, writing down all this information, and you guys have it all up here. So I always love talk about using this letter of intent to pass the baton. It's something that you can pass along. And the other thing it does is really give your vision for what a good quality of life is. You can do the trusts and you can do the wills and power of attorneys, and those are all essential. But the quality of life, to me, probably one of the most important. So anyways, so if you can make it, it's going to be really awesome. All right, enough of that. I apologize. So we are so privileged to have Susan Barrett today, and Susan is the transportation manager at the Lexington Community Center for the town of Lexington. I've been working with the town of Lexington for quite some time. I'm really impressed with the amount that they do for people with disabilities and the transportation available. Susan also is going to talk a little bit about more globally what kind of transportation options there are, because we realize that not everybody lives in Lexington. So anyways, so I'm going to hand it over to Susan. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone. I'm so glad to be here today. I love talking about transportation. I could talk about it for hours, but I will keep within our time limit. So thank you to the ARC of Massachusetts for having me, for the Dana Home Foundation for sponsoring this series, and for LexMedia, who is taping this for people at home.
I forgot to mention LexMedia. I'm sorry, this is Julie. Oh my goodness.
Thank you, Julie, from LexMedia.
They're wonderful.
No, we really appreciate their services. So yes, I'm here to talk about transportation options. And when I first started making my slides, I started doing my usual putting in all the Lexington services, and I said, wait a minute, this is the ARC of Massachusetts. we're gonna have people coming and watching from home that are from different places. So I've made it a little bit more global, as was stated earlier, and I will dive a little bit into some of the Lexington specific ones, just to also show you what you can think about what might be comparable in your communities, okay? And you have a handout as well that has the slides, just 4 short slides here. So for finding your transportation options, here's some of the core places I would start with. First, start with your, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be first, but one of the main ones is your Regional Transportation Authority. Now, how many of you live within the MBTA service area? Okay, how many of you live in another RTA service area? Okay, how many of you are unsure which RTA you're a part of? Okay, so may I ask what town you're in, or what? Yes.
I'm in Acton.
Okay. Alrighty. So, so there's a variety of regional transportation authorities. The MBTA serves 175 communities, and sometimes that overlaps with other RTAs. In Lexington, or if you're in, say, one of our border towns or some of the other towns really close to us, you're most likely in the MBTA. In Lexington, we have fixed route bus service, and then a lot of times people will take that to the train, like to Alewife. We don't have commuter rail in our town, but some of our neighboring towns do, like Belmont, Waltham, so on. And the reason to check with your RTA is, one, they may have those fixed route services that you may be able to use, but in addition, whenever you have a fixed route public transportation service, you also have to have a complimentary ADA paratransit service. And the ADA paratransit service is for anyone who cannot take the fixed route service some or all of the time due to a mental, physical, or cognitive impairment. So it could be that you have a loved one that, I'm just going to go with a visual, maybe they have a sight issue. Maybe at night they can't really get around on their own, but during the day they're completely fine taking a fixed route service, but at certain times they cannot. So there are people that sometimes are using both, but not always. And then the other thing RTAs, almost all RTAs offer, and definitely the MBTA, is free travel training. For the MBTA area, this is done in a few ways. They have group training, small group trainings, and also one-on-one trainings where they will actually go out with the rider. Say it's someone who wants to learn how to get to and from a job, or maybe it's to and from a grocery store. Someplace that they need to get to periodically, they can travel with that person to make sure they understand the route, how to do it, how to pay their fares. If they need to use the accessibility features that are on the buses or whatever the service is, they make sure that they're familiar with that. So I'd say it's not as well known as it should be. It's a wonderful service. We've even held some group trainings here where we've had an MBTA bus pull right up to our front door, and people got to tour it and see all the different accessibility features. There's also discounted fare programs that RTAs usually provide. For the MBTA service area, which again Lexington is in, this includes a senior Charlie card for people 65 and over. It includes a transportation access pass for people with disabilities that gives you that same discount. It also includes a blind access Charlie card. So if you are legally blind, you can get a Charlie card that gives you completely free transportation on the MBTA, and also for your personal care attendant if you have one. And then there's other ones for youth under the age of 25 that are 25 and younger who are low income, and then there's also discounts for students that are in middle and high school. And one of the other things I'll mention, at least if you live in the MBTA area, they have a new mobility center where they've really tried to take, as I understand it, the different things that pertain to accessibility and to people with disabilities and try to put it under one roof to better coordinate. So they've come out with some new materials. I have a little brochure about the mobility center. They have sent us their Access in Motion booklet about the things they're trying to do to make their services more accessible. It is an old service, so they do have to kind of retrofit some things to make all of them accessible. And they sent us a few goodies that we have left. But that's where, whether you're applying for the ride, and maybe you go there to apply for the ride, which is what our ADA paratransit is called from the MBTA. They may also be able to inform you about some other services that exist in your community that you can use in addition to the ride. Or they'll tell you about some of the accessibility features and how to use them, or maybe both, depending on your situation. So it is a resource for you. So I wanted to show you the webpage for the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. So some people receive one or more services through this department, and some of those services may include transportation benefits as well. So, and I was just going to really scroll down through some of the programs that are a part of this. I think I heard earlier someone mentioned Department of Developmental Services. You may have Department of Youth Services, Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission, Mass Health, Department of Mental Health. So there's a variety of different programs, and sometimes through these programs you may qualify for transportation benefits. Okay, so definitely look into that. You know, even with Mass Health, they have a range of programs. Some people, it's just naturally part of their Mass Health program. Others may have a more limited form of Mass Health. But I found out yesterday, trying to help someone who doesn't have a disability but is just low income, is on Mass Health and was trying to get to a dental appointment all the way in Peabody, which is quite expensive if you have to pay out of pocket. But if there's like an emergency need, you can at least ask your medical provider if they would essentially, you know, prescribe this need for transportation, and then they'll see if it qualifies. So definitely look at that, at least find out what's available to you. And then, all right, and then the other thing is Mass Ride Match, which is a statewide database, kind of meant to be a one-stop shop to find transportation. Now, the thing about this database, it's fantastic. I love that it was started. And the idea really was to create this one-stop shop rather than everybody just trying to figure out going to all these different websites. I will caution you, though, that the data is only as good as what people have provided to it. So it's very possible that there are some providers, some vendors providing transportation services that maybe didn't know that this website or that this database existed, and so they haven't included their information. Some people, things might have changed and they haven't updated it, but it is pretty expansive, so at least take a look at it. And as you can see, you'd enter your town, where you're going to, time of day, purpose, and then they have all these categories. Whether you're a senior, a student, a veteran, do you need accessible services, and so on. Will you have a personal care attendant, or do you need a personal care attendant? So definitely check it out. Some of the services that are in here are private services where you would just pay the full cost. Some will be more public services. Okay. And then the other thing I was going to show you is, check your own town's website. So I'm going to show you what ours looks like. Not every town does their websites the same way, but I'll just show you what ours is like. So on the Lexington, how many of you are Lexington residents by chance? Okay, just one person, that's okay. Hopefully this is applicable.
Two people.
2 people, yay! No, we love our neighbors as well. On our website, if you go to this transportation button, even though it's a picture of a bus, we have a range of options there. And the way we have it broken down, we give you some walking and biking resources. Then we tell you about the range of buses that we have, essentially. We did toss in our historic trolley because, it is Lexington. We tell you about our free medical rides, which I'll talk about that in a moment. And then we have a section that, even though you may be able to use these services up here if you have a disability, some that are more targeted for seniors and people with disabilities. And then we have a link that will help you get to that. So that's what ours looks like. Now, in some towns, they may not have one page that has their transportation resources listed. They might. Where I would suggest you look at, though, is what do they have listed under senior services or Council on Aging services. Now, the loved one that you're caring for may not be a senior, right? But sometimes the senior service programs are open to people with disabilities, even if they're not a senior. Not always. I did get a complaint. I'm in part of a regional coordinating council where one town was so upset, their representative, because their town senior programs were only open to people over a certain age, and it didn't matter about their ability. So it really depends on the town. The other thing, though, is those senior service pages may also list like the Regional Transportation Authority services that I mentioned. So if it's not on your senior services page, you can also check if you have like a youth and family services department in your town. Check with them, see what they have. And sometimes transportation could be handled out of your planning department and or your Department of Public Works. Transportation as a department in a town, it really varies from town to town as to who's handling it, and sometimes it's multiple departments. But those are some places you could look for some additional resources. And again, most of those should be within that Mass Rides Match database that I showed you. Yeah, so that's hopefully will help you track down some services. And then I'm going to dive just a little bit deeper into Lexington, but again, we'll see how you can relate this to your own community. So I try to give kind of a visual representation of what we have here. And over on the, what is my right, is more of our fixed route services that we have in Lexington. And then over here, towards my left, we have more of our demand responsive services. So in Lexington, we happen to have two MBTA buses, the 62 and the 76. And a little known fact, we have one stop of the 78. It's in East Lexington. These do have ramps and other accessibility features like audio and so forth. As I mentioned earlier, there are a range of discounted fare programs, and then the free travel training. And I highly recommend, if you have a loved one that you think could use fixed route services, look into that free travel training if you think they could benefit from it. Really great program. Some young people may get this in school as part of their program, but not everyone. So definitely check it out, because if your loved one can take fixed route services, it gives them the greatest flexibility once they're comfortable using it. And I realize getting comfortable can take some time, but that's what this travel training program is for. It will also be the lowest cost program for them. So definitely check that out. And that is for seniors and people with disabilities. Okay, in Lexington, we have something called our Rev Alewife Shuttle. It is open to the public. It's actually a commuter program that just travels between Alewife and Hartwell, but we take advantage of the return trip by opening it up to the public. This, if you are someone, say, that needs the wheelchair lift, for that you do have to call them in advance just to make sure they have the fully accessible shuttle on that run. So while all MBTA buses are fully accessible, they do have accessible vehicles, but they don't have every single vehicle as fully accessible, so you just have to call in advance. If you live in a different town, you may have some of those commuter services. I'm just not sure what you have, but oftentimes these are run by what's called a Transportation Management Association, a TMA, and you can look in to see what they have. A lot of towns or a lot of TMAs, their services are not open to the public, but in Lexington we've tried as much as possible to get all services open to the public. Now, this Little service down here, LexPress has been operating in Lexington since 1979, actually in partnership with the MBTA. It used to be that a lot of towns had services like this. It's a little public bus that's kind of meant to be a feeder service and get into like the nooks and crannies that the MBTA can't go to. It is fully accessible. There's a wheelchair lift on every vehicle. They're quite small, there's only 20 seats. We do offer free rides between 9:30 and 2:30. We also offer subsidized passes for people that can't afford to buy a pass but would like one. We offer passes for personal care attendants, and we will deviate off the route if it seems warranted and would help somebody. So a little bit different than the MBTA, which is entirely fixed. We will consider some deviations, and we will also do travel training. And I really enjoy doing that, going out and working with someone so they can figure out how to use the service. So these two over here you may not have in your community. I don't know if you have buses in your community, but if you ask me questions, maybe I can help you out there. Other fixed route services, of course, include trains, commuter rail, things like the Red Line, Green Line, so forth, and then the ferry. I don't know if any of you live near any of the ferry service, but that would be another example of fixed route, all of which have some level of accessibility on it. Now in our community, over here to this side, we have more of our demand responsive programs. So one of the largest ones would be the ADA paratransit. So in our community, being that we're part of the MBTA, that service is provided by the ride. If you're in another RTA's area, check with them to see what is available. I like to tell people, sometimes people say, oh, that's not for me. I don't have a disability. Sometimes people think, well, I have to be in a wheelchair to use this. And that's not the case. Again, the reason you would sign up for ADA paratransit is because there's a mental, physical, or cognitive impairment that prevents you from using fixed route services some or all of the time. It's kind of the biggest tool in someone's toolbox, transportation toolbox, if they can't use fixed route services all the time. So at least take a look at it. In our community or in our MBTA service area, the ride not only composes vehicles that look like this, but it also has smaller sedans, and it now makes use of Uber and Lyft, where some people can get same-day, on-demand rides. What you get kind of depends what you say you would like. Some people are leery of using Uber and Lyft. Others are completely fine, and they hope that all their trips would be allowed to be taken via Uber and Lyft. Some people need the much more supportive services of paratransit, not just, someone to drive them somewhere, but they also need someone to assist them to the door, maybe carry their groceries, things like that. That would be the more traditional ride service. If you're using the on-demand, same-day Uber Lyft, it really is just an Uber or Lyft driver that's not going to help you get all the way to the door. So just something to understand. But interestingly, I think I heard the statistic that about 85% of ride users don't need the full level ride service. They just need someone to drive them somewhere. So something to keep in mind. In Lexington, we have sort of like a fill-in safety net service. We call it our Lex Connect Taxi program. Really started as something primarily for seniors out of our Council on Aging Senior Services program, but we do make taxi rides available for people with disabilities if one of these other options is just not feasible. So that's why I say take a look at your senior services or Council on Aging programs in your community to see if they have something similar. It might be a taxi, it could be a subsidy for like an Uber or Lyft program. It's at least check and see what they might have available. For us, our taxi service goes to a 17-town area. And then one thing we have, and we are so fortunate to have this, is a volunteer program called FISH. Some other communities have this as well. They're wonderful. Our program is focused solely on offering free rides to medical appointments. It's called FISH. It's been operating since 1974. And it's essentially Lexington residents giving other Lexington residents rides to medical appointments. There is no age limit. Rides are anywhere within the Boston metropolitan area. However, you do have to realize that it's people using their own vehicles. So if you need a fully accessible vehicle, that is usually not available, but oftentimes they have taken people that use wheelchairs as long as it can be folded up, put in a trunk. Same thing with a walker, crutch, or anything like that. It's a really lovely program because it's also a way to just get connected to people in the community. And then of course, in addition to Uber and Lyft being part of like the ride program, you can use it on your own. If you have someone that's not comfortable using a smartphone to use such programs, there's also another service called GoGo, where you can just call in and book the service even though it would come from Uber or Lyft. And again, your town could have what they call like a concierge service where they may be able to book these rides for you. And then there will be some other private options are available, just any taxi, any livery service that you could just hire on your own. So, take a sip of water here. And then that brings me to my last slide. Any questions? And I do have my contact information here. And even if you are from another town, you're like, hey, I heard you had this in Lexington. Do you know who you could direct me to in my town? I may or may not know someone, but feel free to ask me. I'm at a lot of different regional meetings, so I may possibly know someone in your community. But can I answer any questions? Yes?
I had a question about Uber.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who have kind of taken advantage of it, that's then been, getting services through the ride.
Yeah.
And I heard it was limited, how many Ubers you can get.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so the ride, again, the MBTA's ADA paratransit service had been piloting a partnership with Uber and Lyft for many, many years.
Okay.
And it finally got to the point where they formalized that partnership, and it's called Flex Ride now. So if you go to the MBTA website, mbta.com/theride, you'll find out all about the standard ride program, and then also this Flex Ride, which is with Uber and Lyft. Now, how many of those rides you get when you first sign up will depend on your ride history. So if you've never signed up and you're brand new, I hear they usually start you off with 2. Now, I work with a senior citizen who takes just about every service that's out there. Even his Medicare plan offers transportation to medical appointments. So he's got a lot of tools in his transportation toolbox. But he started off, when he first signed up with the ride, he only got 2 of those. Now he's up to 10. So it just kind of depends on your history. If you sign up and say you're someone who has been using the ride to get to and from work every day, maybe it's 5 days a week and you're using the ride that often, chances are if you're able to switch to Uber Lyft, they're probably giving you more. Like I know some people have started off with 40 or 50 rides via their Uber Lyft program. So it really just depends on your ride history. Yes?
I did want to say on that my son was approved for that, and one of the things with Lyft and Uber is, the drivers, they obviously set their own schedule, they can work when they want, they don't have to, so because my son needs support to set up his rides, it's problematic because he's had more than once where they just send him a text and say they've canceled the ride. Maybe they decide, they don't want to work anymore that day. And so then he's kind of stuck. So just something to be aware of that, in that situation, you're going to have to help them have some kind of backup plan. So for him, he's learned how to do regular Uber or Lyft, but it was kind of frustrating because the whole point was, that it was going to save him some money and, help with the cost, so.
And he couldn't retake that same ride in the app, like reschedule it if it got canceled instead of his ride credit?
Well, it's different when it's the Flex Ride than the straight Lyft ride. So it was just too much for him to handle on the spot when he's standing outside of a grocery store or getting off work, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just wanted to make you guys aware of that.
No, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, and what works for some people may not work for all people, and it's really great to be familiar with some of these things. And the thing about Uber and Lyft, while they can be relatively plentiful, again, they don't have the same training as someone that's say, driving the true ADA paratransit vehicles in your community. So, any other questions or comments? Yes, Lisa?
How do you find the cost of these various services? What it costs?
Sure. So if you're talking about, your fixed route services, just look on the website. So here, for like the MBTA services, it's usually roughly like $1.70 to maybe $2.10. If you get the discounted fare programs, it's half off of those, unless it's a blind access program that is free. The ADA paratransit can be no more than double the cost of whatever the fixed route service is. For the ride right now, I believe it's $335 for the standard ride. And I wish they would change their name just to make it easier when I talk about getting rides. And then I think it's $560, I believe, if it's the premium one. When you're using the Flex ride, my understanding is right now you usually pay the first $3 of that ride, and then they're paying the next $40, and then anything on top of that you're paying. And again, if you're in a different area with a different paratransit service, just check with them. For some of the other things, like our taxi service, you're not from here, so just check with those programs to see what their costs are. And then for some of the other programs that I mentioned from the Executive Office of Health and Human Services, potentially that's free for you. So some people, for example, get free rides to medical appointments through them. So just check with the particular program.
And the other thing is, with your volunteer service that you have, which I think is great, do you vet them? Do you vet the volunteers? How do you make sure they're good?
Whoever runs the volunteer program might do it differently. So the town does not run that volunteer program. It's actually run by a nonprofit called FISH, which stands for Friendly, Independent, Sympathetic Help. Most of their drivers for that program tend to be seniors. It tends to be people who have time because they're retired. I did drive for them when I was working part-time. I actually enjoyed it because I got to meet a lot of great people, and it was an easy way to give back to the community. But how they go through those programs really just depends on who's running them. I need to check with them, yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
In cases that the person needs to have someone with them all the time, when you're purchasing the pass or discounted pass, what would happen to that person's fare, the one who's assisting?
Yeah, so like in our situation here, like with our Lexpress bus, we will just give you a personal care attendant pass, and so you don't have to pay for that. So if the person qualifies for our subsidized pass program because of a disability and they need an attendant, we give them the PCA pass at no additional charge. With other programs, you should just check. I know with the ADA paratransit, your personal care attendant can ride at no extra cost, as I understand. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that. Now I'm questioning myself, but I believe that is the case. And then things like a taxi program. So for us, we only charge you for the ride for like where you're going from point to point. So if you have other people coming with you, there's no additional charge to that. Again, in your communities, just ask that question of the particular service.
There's another question.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of maybe logistics, but imagining that we are living in a town that has a good, MBTA and bus service and everything, but the house is located too far from the station.
Yeah.
And it's not located in the bus route that you can just, wave your hand and there's
Right.
stuff. So getting from home to the station is kind of almost a hassle.
Yeah.
And the person cannot do it, so would you just rather to just get the right to go to your destination, which might be even closer than the bus station.
So that's where, if you apply, I don't know if you're in the MBTA service area, but are you?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
I live
So
in Framingham, they have everything, but then
Oh,
my
okay.
house is not close to the bus station.
Right.
Even for
So-
me, it's hard, I don't want my daughter, so.
Right, Framingham, you're in a different RTA. I think it's
The other right.
I think it's Metro West RTA. I'd have to look that one up. But check with them, because sometimes what they will do, and it depends on the situation. If it makes more sense to just take the person from point A to point B, that's what will happen. Or if it makes more sense to take that person to the fixed route service where they can carry on the rest of the ride, that's what will happen. So just check with your service provider to see how they would handle it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Any other questions or comments? Did you want me to talk about advocacy in any
That sounds wonderful.
way? Okay, I didn't make a slide for this. I wasn't sure we'd have time. But, you know, one of the things people talk, I mean, even though I mentioned what maybe sounds like an array of services, there's obviously some gaps in those services. And that's the thing I hear so often from people, is they just want better service. And we know that transportation is key for a quality of life, for getting a job, getting health care, just getting out and getting recreation, right? So if you want to advocate for better service in your area, there's a number of things you could do. Certainly always talk to your legislators. If you have some level of local transportation services, but maybe you think they could be better, you could certainly talk to your select board and whoever is in charge of the services in your area. In the MBTA community, there's also a group called the Riders Transportation Access Group. So for seniors and people with disabilities, that's a wonderful advocacy group trying to do things to make improvements at the end.
Just repeat that name, Susan.
Our tag, Riders Transportation Access Group, and they have, they'll send out email updates. They have a dedicated page on the MBTA website, so that's a good place to go. The other thing is, you know, you're all from Massachusetts, right? You all live in Massachusetts. You know, we have a new governor who will be coming in, who's putting together her transportation plans, and she has just formed some different committees, one of which is all about transportation. I believe what they're calling it is the How Do We Get Around Committee. And they're accepting recommendations, and I don't have a link, but I know they've just put up a website with a link where you can send in comments. So if I get that link and maybe send it to you, if you put out a newsletter, that would be a place where you can send in information as well. There's also other groups like Transportation for Massachusetts, Transit Matters. There's a bunch of different advocacy groups trying to do things related to transportation. We used to have Mass Mobility. We were talking about, there's a wonderful, wonderful state employee, Rachel Fichtenbaum, knows a ton about transportation. She's still at the state, but Mass Mobility is no longer. But she does a great job getting people together through regional coordinating councils, which your towns may be a part of. We are, or not. So there's different avenues for advocating. Yeah, any other questions or comments? All right, well, I have some materials here. Some are Lexington specific, but some are not, including as Access in Motion. And feel free to take what you like. And thank you so much for your time, and thank you for making this happen. I appreciate it.